This is Planes of Hollywood, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, presented by the Antique Air Show.
I didn't know you could fly a plane!
Why, yes! Land, go!
Hello and welcome back to the Antique Air Show. My name is Jared, and in today's video we're taking a look at the third film in the Indiana Jones franchise, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Released in 1989, the film would focus on the strained relationship between Indiana Jones, played once again by Harrison Ford, and his father, Henry Jones Sr., played by Sean Connery. The movie itself is set in 1938, with Indiana Jones setting on a quest to find his father, a Holy Grail scholar who had been kidnapped by the Nazis to aid their search for the Grail. Spielberg, having signed on for 3 movies when originally creating Raiders, would also return to direct. The film, on release, was highly successful, earning over $479 million at the international box office, making it the highest grossing film of 1989, and would win the Oscar for Best Sound Effects Editing at the 62nd Academy Awards. In terms of aircraft, The Last Crusade has a few, and perhaps importantly, it has one of the best aerial sequences in the whole franchise. So let's not delay a minute more, roll the film, and let's take a look at the aircraft of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Dad, are we hit?
More or less. John, I'm sorry. They got us.
The first aircraft of the film comes not too far in, as Indiana Jones heads off from the United States to Venice, Italy, in search of his father. In doing so, he boards a DC-3/C-47, and we get the iconic map montage as he travels across the Atlantic. There is not much information on this particular scene, and I have covered the C-47 in a separate video, so would recommend checking that out. The link will be in the description below. In the meantime, we move on to the next aircraft. The next aircraft to appear in The Last Crusade is a Zeppelin. The Zeppelin comes into the film as it is the mode of transport that Indy chooses to use to escape Germany after successfully rescuing his father from the captivity of the Germans. The Zeppelin in this film is a fictitious version with a fictitious registration D-138. It also has attachment points for fighter aircraft, even though Zeppelins were never built to carry other aircraft. Zeppelins are a type of rigid airship that were originally invented by the German Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, with his first prototype LZ-1 taking to the air for the first time on the 2nd of July 1900 from a floating hangar atop of Lake Constance, Friedrichshafen. They would be weaponized and used by the German armed forces throughout World War I, where they became infamous for their raids against Britain. These raids would do little damage to British cities, although their psychological value was significant. The 1920s and into the 1930s would be the Zeppelin's heyday, becoming the status for long-distance travel. In 1928, the new Graf Zeppelin was launched, one of the finest Zeppelins to be created. It would make headlines when during 1929 it departed on a successful around-the-world flight in 21 days. But the Zeppelin era would come to an abrupt and tragic end. On May 7, 1937, the Hindenburg, one of the most impressive and modern versions of the Zeppelin, not to mention the world's largest dirigible airship, was coming into land at Lakehurst, New Jersey, when the airship burst into flames. Of the 97 people on board, tragically 13 passengers and 22 crew were killed, and 1 person on the ground would also lose their life in the event. The Hindenburg disaster would become one of the most famous aviation disasters in history and would mark the end of the Zeppelin. The Hindenburg sister ship, the Graf Zeppelin, was dismantled shortly thereafter, following a career that saw it make 590 flights.
No ticket.
For the film, much of the Zeppelin shots were achieved with an 8-foot model of the airship against a blue screen that was later composited together with a sky background plate. During the filming of some of the interior scenes within the Zeppelin, both Sean Connery and Harrison Ford filmed wearing shorts, despite all the other passengers being dressed in fur coats. This was Connery's idea, as he had a tendency to sweat a lot and as such decided that it would be too hot to wear pants. Ford follows suit.
We played one of the scenes on the Zeppelin. All the passengers were wearing fur coats and hats, and it's supposed to be in the winter time. And I played it without my trousers. And Harrison said, "You're not going to play the scene without your trousers." I said, "Well, if I don't, I'll be stopping all the time because I sweat enormously. I sweat very easily." Well, he did the same.
If we hit play, we quickly move on to our next aircraft, and things quickly become interesting.
We're turning around. They're taking us back to Germany.
Indy and his father are discovered, and as a result, the Zeppelin begins turning back to Berlin. Indy decides to make a run-up, and he finds his way into an aircraft attached to the Zeppelin. Henry Jones Sr. jumps in, and the two make their daring escape. As they fly away from the Zeppelin, they are quickly pursued by German fighter aircraft, and a thrilling plane chase begins. For these sequences, Spielberg relied on a Stomp et Vertongen SV4 for Indy and his father, and a Swiss trainer, the Pilatus P2, for the two German fighters. The Stomp et Vertongen SV4 was a Belgium trainer sports aircraft designed by Stomp et Vertongen in the early 1930s. The SV4 was designed by George Ivanov following a request from company owner Jean Stomp for a twin-seat training aircraft that had improved access to the front seat. It first flew in May 1933, but of the original design, only 6 were produced, as in 1935, Ivanov and Jean's son, Leon Stomp, were killed in an air crash. The design would be passed to a man by the name of Demidov. In 1937, another 2 examples emerged, this time with 2 extra ailerons and a redesigned tail section. Demidov would modify the design further, sweeping back both wings, and by 1939, orders had arrived from both Belgium and France. However, only the first batch of SV4s could be completed before the German army began their invasion of France and Belgium in May of 1940. Following the Second World War, as the French and Belgium began rebuilding their air forces, the SV4 was put back into production. In France, licensed production was undertaken by SNCAN, and these models would become known as the SV4C and used mainly by the French military as primary trainers. The SV4C were equipped with a Renault 4PEI engine, and production was also undertaken in Algeria. Jean Stomp, alongside Alfred Renards, formed Stomp and Renards Company in 1947, and together they would produce 65 SV4Bs for use with the Belgium Air Force. Originally fitted with a Gypsy 10 engine, the later versions would come equipped with Blackburn power plants. They remained in service with the Belgium Air Force until the 1970s, being used as glider tugs. Reportedly, there was meant to be a second biplane attached to the Zeppelin. This would have been utilised by a Gestapo agent who was a World War I flying ace to give chase to Indy and his father. However, this was cut from the film, and the exterior shots of the Zeppelin only ever show one biplane attached. If you read the novelisation or the comic book of The Last Crusade, the Gestapo agent and the second biplane are all kept in it. The Pilatus P2, on the other hand, was a training aircraft developed for the Swiss Air Force throughout the 1940s and 1950s. Spielberg has specifically chosen this aircraft for the film as it shares similarities to the fighter aircraft of the German Air Force during the late 1930s, while also being not too fast to film. The design of the P2 dates back to the early 1940s. Pilatus as a company was still relatively new, having only formed in 1939. Their first aircraft, known as the P1, had failed to properly interest the government and as a result was never built. In 1942, they began work on the next design, a basic trainer, the P2, which would take to the air for the first time on the 27th of April 1945. The P2 was designed to be built quickly and efficiently, and as a result made use of a number of parts from aircraft already in service with the Swiss Air Force that were beginning to be retired. The tailwheel, parts of the canopy, and the main undercarriage and fairing were all borrowed from the Me-109s of the Swiss Air Force. The engine chosen was the inverted V12 Argus AS410A2 that could produce 485 horsepower, and the first order of 28 P205s began arriving to the Swiss Air Force in May 1947. The P205 was an unarmed trainer. This was followed by a second order of P206s, which had the addition of carrying a synchronized machine gun and light bombs or rockets. Deliveries, totaling 52 aircraft of all variants, were completed by 1950. As a trainer, the P2 would have a career that would span some 30 years with the Swiss Air Force before finally being retired in 1981. At the conclusion of service, a number were scrapped before an intervention resulted in the remaining examples being sold to private owners. The Last Crusade made use of the P2 owned and loaned to the film by Jacques Beret, who had purchased it straight from the Swiss Air Force. Beret also flew the aircraft throughout the 5 weeks of filming that took place in southern Spain throughout 1988, where an impressive total of 21 hours of film material was gathered of the aircraft flying. Today, this particular P2 is still owned and flown by Beret and can be seen at various airshows in Europe. An array of models and real aircraft were utilised to achieve the various shots in the entire flying sequence. Flying examples of both the Stomp SV4 and Pilatus P2 were attained and used for filming. Ford and Connery filmed their shots inside a full-scale mock-up of the biplane against a blue screen, and behind-the-scenes footage also shows what looks like a full-scale mock-up of a Pilatus P2, but this is not expanded on in any detail. The sequence where the German fighter flies into the tunnel and explodes was reportedly a tricky sequence to shoot. Miniature models and sets alongside blue screen shots and live-action pyrotechnics will all combine together to make the sequence work. For the scene with all the seagulls flying up into the aircraft, the shot on the beaches were achieved with model seagulls for long distance shots, and then white doves flying up into the air for the close-up shots, because seagulls were not trainable and would not fly up into the sky when directed to do so. As we flick through the rest of The Last Crusade, we will find that there's no reason to stop, as there is not another aircraft featured in the rest of the film. Sure, there is a great tank battle, but a tank is not an aircraft, and as such, there is no reason to stop. As the end credits roll, we have a neat little total of 5 aircraft present throughout The Last Crusade. We have 1 C-47, 1 Zeppelin, 1 Stomp SV4, and 1 Pilatus P2 playing the role of 2 German fighters. The Last Crusade is a fun and enjoyable film, and the aircraft throughout fit the historical setting of the film quite well. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.